He wept beside the coffin, alone beneath the pale morning sky. No ceremony, no last call, just silence, and the leash of a hero still warm in his hands. The world had moved on, but he hadn't, until a single bark, not from memory, not imagined, real, sharp, alive. It cut through the air like a whisper from the grave, and in that moment, everything changed. What followed would uncover betrayal, ignite justice, and prove that sometimes God's miracles walk on four legs. If you believe that love never truly dies, and that courage echoes beyond the grave, subscribe now and comment Amen if you still believe in second chances. Red Hollow, Colorado, mid-January. The storm had rolled in from the west like a tide of silence, swallowing the mountain town in white. Pine trees bent under the weight of frost-laden limbs, and the main street was deserted save for drifting snow and flickering lamplight. Beneath the gray morning sky, the cemetery sat like a frozen breath, its headstones poking from the snow like memories refusing to stay buried. Logan Carter stood alone before the fresh grave, his dark blue uniform half obscured by the swirling snow. He was 36, broad-shouldered with a lean athletic build shaped by a decade in law enforcement. A faint scar ran along the side of his jaw, a reminder from a gang bust gone sideways years ago. His hair was jet black, slicked back now by melting flakes, and his eyes, storm gray like the clouds above, held a grief that hadn't blinked in days. Axel had been more than a dog. He had been a partner, a constant, and a mirror to the parts of Logan that no one else could reach. The German Shepherd had been with him for 6 years, trained with precision, courage in his veins, and a bark that could freeze any suspect mid-step. Axel was the type of dog that didn't just follow orders, he anticipated them. At 9 years old, he'd slowed a little but still outpaced rookies in both instinct and loyalty. Now, that loyalty was buried under a mound of snow and soil. Logan clutched the K9 leash in his gloved hand. The leather was worn from years of use, the clasp still smelling faintly of Axel's fur. A small group of officers stood a respectful distance behind him, their hats off, eyes down. The town's mayor and police commissioner hadn't made it. Snowstorm excuses. Or maybe they just didn't know how to face the kind of silence Axel left behind. A woman stepped forward quietly, her boots crunching in the snow. Sarah Quinlan, the town's only full-time detective, paused beside Logan. She was in her early 40s, tall and slender with red hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun and a face weathered not by age but by loss. Years ago, she'd lost a son to a roadside bombing overseas. Since then, she had carried herself with a kind of distant dignity, kind, but untouchable. She placed a hand on Logan's shoulder without speaking. They didn't need words. Grief spoke loud enough. "He saved me, Sarah," Logan said, voice hoarse. "One more time. Just walked in there and took the hit, like he knew." She nodded. He always knew. The storm was beginning to thicken. Flakes fell like ash from a sky unwilling to let go. Logan knelt, brushing snow from the headstone. The granite was still raw, chiseled just yesterday. Axel, loyal until the last breath. He wanted to believe it had ended the way they said, that it had been quick. That the suspect, a low-level dealer named Curtis Vale, had gotten spooked and fired blindly, that Axel had jumped between the bullet and Logan without hesitation. That it had been clean, but it hadn't felt clean. Axel's body had been found too far from where the suspect stood. His eyes, wide open even in death, had locked with Logan's like he was trying to say something. A message unspoken. A warning. Then there was the wound, small, almost surgical, not like the usual impact of a .38. It didn't add up. None of it did. But Logan had buried those doubts along with his partner, until this morning. Tucked beneath the windshield of his cruiser, held in place by snow and wiper blade, was a letter, no stamp, no name, just a folded sheet of paper with a message written in plain block print. Axel didn't die the way you think. Dig deeper. No signature, no explanation. Just those chilling words and a drop of something darker than ink smeared across the edge of the page. Blood? Coffee? He didn't know, but it snapped something open in him. Now, as he stood at the grave again, he felt his gut knot the same way it did when a suspect lied just a little too smoothly. Behind him, Father Whitlock read the final prayer over the wind. The elderly priest was hunched with age, his voice gentle but firm. He had known Axel, often feeding him scraps during station visits. Even now, his hand trembled with the weight of loss. Logan didn't hear the prayer. His focus remained fixed on the headstone. The leash twitched in his hand. A ghost memory. Axel pulling, alerting, barking. But there was no bark now, only wind. The snow began falling harder, a hush of white swallowing the cemetery. One of the junior officers, a thin, 20-year-old named Parker with freckles and a nervous habit of adjusting his belt, whispered, "Sir, storm's getting worse. We should head back soon." Logan nodded without looking back. "You go. I'll follow." Parker hesitated, then retreated with the others, their boots crunching away into distance. Sarah remained a moment longer. "You think there's something wrong?" she said finally. "I know there is," he replied. "Then don't stop digging." She turned, her figure vanishing into the snow. Logan remained, staring at the mound of earth that now held 6 years of loyalty, bravery, and silent conversation. He didn't know where to start, but he knew one thing for sure. Axel hadn't just died. He had died trying to tell him something. And now Logan would listen. Even if it took unearthing every shadow in Red Hollow. The snowstorm had eased by morning, but the cold lingered like a wound that refused to scab. Logan Carter sat in his office at the Red Hollow Police Department, the lights off, a mug of black coffee untouched at his elbow. The station was unusually quiet for a Monday, with most officers still clearing out the aftermath of the storm from roads and sidewalks. Outside his window, frost clung to the edges of the glass like desperate fingers. Logan wasn't focused on the world outside. His eyes were on the report in front of him, Axel's autopsy. He had requested it personally from the county's forensic division the night before. What he received that morning was polished. Too polished. Every line felt scrubbed, like someone was trying not just to present facts, but to sell a version of the truth. The report stated the cause of death was a single gunshot wound to the side, consistent with friendly fire or suspect return fire. But Logan remembered clearly there had been no visible blood at the scene. Axel's fur had been clean, the body oddly cold despite the recent death, and something else was off, the time of death. The report marked it an hour before the unit even arrived at the scene. He leaned back in his chair, jaw clenched. If they lied about the time, what else had been fabricated? A knock came on the door, not loud, just a soft rap like someone unsure if they should be interrupting. "Come in," Logan called. The door opened to reveal Dana Hale, the local veterinarian. She was in her mid-30s, compactly built with sun-browned skin and a purposeful stride. Her auburn hair was tied in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans under her white coat with snow still melting at the hem. Dana wasn't just the town's vet, she was Axel's doctor, and one of the few people Logan trusted outside the badge. "Didn't expect to see you here," Logan said, waving her in. She stepped inside, brushing snow from her shoulders. "I wasn't going to come, but something's been bugging me since Axel's final exam." Logan raised an eyebrow. "Final exam?" "The body scan I did before you transferred him to the funeral home. You remember I requested to see him." "I remember," he said, sitting forward now. "I took images," she continued, pulling a USB drive from her pocket. "I didn't say anything then because, honestly, I didn't know what I was looking at. But there's a puncture wound, very small, just behind the front left leg. Not a bullet, no burn ring, no trace metal, almost like an injection site." Logan took the drive slowly. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" Dana's voice tightened. "Because I've seen something like it before, 2 years ago. Another K9 in Boulder died under mysterious circumstances. The vet who raised questions about the cause of death lost her job. I didn't want to believe this town would cover up something like that. But now..." She hesitated. Now, I think someone's erasing the truth. Logan didn't speak. He opened a drawer, retrieved his patrol car's dashcam hard drive, and plugged it into his computer. The folder was empty. That's what had been eating at him since last night. All data from the day of the raid gone. But there was a ghost log entry, a record that video had once existed and had been erased manually. Not a crash, not corruption. Someone had gone in and deleted the file. He opened the station's internal logbook and checked access history. 2 names appeared, Logan Carter and Carl Simmons. Carl, of course. He hadn't spoken much to Carl since the day of the raid. They had been in the same unit, tasked with approaching the east side of the abandoned mill. Carl had been the first one to draw, claiming he saw the suspect move behind a stack of crates. Axel had surged forward, barking madly. And then chaos. Gunfire. Smoke. Carl had claimed Axel was caught in the crossfire. That was the last Logan saw of his partner before everything went dark. Carl Simmons was a tall, stocky man in his early 40s, with a mustache he constantly groomed and a grin that rarely reached his eyes. He had always been more politician than officer, liked shaking hands, giving press interviews, being the face of cooperation. But off camera, Carl had a temper, and a problem with authority. Logan tapped the intercom. "Terry, is Simmons on duty today?" The voice of Terry McAllister, the station's dispatcher woman in her 60s with no patience for nonsense, came through. "He's out sick, supposedly. Was he in the building yesterday?" "Briefly, just dropped something off. Why?" Logan didn't answer. He closed the autopsy file, pocketed Dana's USB, and stood. "Do you think it was deliberate?" Dana asked, voice quiet. "I don't know," Logan said, "but I'm going to find out." Outside the office, the snow had started again, gentle but persistent. Dana walked with him toward the front. "Whatever you're about to dig up, Logan, be careful. If someone's hiding this, they won't stop at lying." Logan gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Lying's easy to undo. You just need the truth louder." As she left, Logan returned to his cruiser, already brushing snow from the windshield. He thought again about the letter tucked there the day before. The words circled like wolves in his head. "Axel didn't die the way you think." The forest surrounding Red Hollow was ancient old pine and cedar trees knotted together into a canopy that muffled wind and time alike. Snow blanketed the trail, crunching beneath Logan Carter's boots as he followed a barely visible path through the trees. His breath steamed in the cold air, and the distant creak of branches overhead reminded him of a different time, a different mission. 6 years ago, during Axel's early field training, they had stumbled upon an abandoned cabin deep in this part of the woods. It had become a private spot, a place where Axel had led him once without command, as if something there spoke to the dog's instincts. At the time, Logan had dismissed it, just a broken-down shack, miles from town. But now, with the ghost of Axel's death still fresh and unanswered questions mounting, that memory had clawed its way back. He moved with deliberate steps, hand resting near the holster on his side. There were no patrols out here, no cell signal. Just pine needles, snow, and secrets. After nearly 30 minutes of walking, the outline of the cabin appeared between the trees like a ghost surfacing from fog. It leaned slightly to one side, shingles missing, windows cracked, the front door ajar. The place hadn't been touched in years, but something in Logan's gut twisted. Outside the doorway, embedded faintly in the snow, were paw prints, large, deep, fresh. They weren't Axel's. These were wider and rounder, likely from a different breed. And they were alone. No boot tracks beside them. Just the animal. Logan knelt beside the prints, brushing a glove gently over one. Judging from the depth, the dog was heavy. Adult. Recently, here. His eyes swept the area until they locked onto something half buried in the snow a few feet ahead, black nylon glinting under frost. He moved toward it and pulled it out. A K9 training collar, the kind issued to law enforcement dogs, but this one bore a worn brass nameplate. Maven. Unit 23. It wasn't Axel's. He turned it over and noticed a faded chip tag sewn into the fabric. He pocketed it for later analysis. That made 2 K9’s, now 1 dead under mysterious circumstances, 1 lost out here. Or alive. Inside the cabin, dust clung to every surface like time itself had thickened. The walls bore faded posters of deer hunting regulations, and a cracked mirror hung beside a fireplace that hadn't seen flame in years. A tangle of blankets, dirtied and shredded, lay in the corner. Logan crouched beside them. There were tufts of fur embedded in the fabric. Someone or something had been sleeping here. And then, carved into the wood near the doorframe, he saw initials. Not old and weathered, but recent. A.L. Beneath it, a date, 07-14. Logan's mind flashed through memory, flipping through mental files until it landed on a cold case. Aidan Lowry, 6 years old, went missing from a camping trip with his father near Miller's Creek, last seen wearing a red jacket. Disappeared without a trace. The case had gone cold 3 months in, but Logan remembered it vividly because Axel had been part of the search. The scent trail had led nowhere. Axel had acted oddly during the search, pawing at rocks and growling softly toward the northern forest. Logan had assumed the child had drowned or been taken far off. They'd never found the body. Now, 6 months later, these initials scratched in wood. Could Aidan still be alive? And what did a second K9 have to do with him? He turned at the sound of a low growl, instinctive, deep, just outside the door. Logan's hand went to his sidearm, but he paused. Through the cracked wood frame, he caught a flash of movement fur, golden brown, just vanishing into the tree line. A dog. Big. Likely the one that made the tracks. But there was no aggression in the growl. It had sounded more like a warning. He moved quickly out into the open, snow crunching beneath him. The trees stood still. Whatever had been watching was gone. He exhaled and stepped back toward the cabin, scanning the tree line one last time. Back inside, he took out his phone, even though he knew it wouldn't connect. He used the camera to take pictures of the paw prints, the collar, the initials. He wasn't sure what this meant yet, but it felt like the threads were beginning to weave together. On the walk back, Logan turned the collar over in his hand again. Maven. That wasn't a dog he'd ever worked with. Maybe another department. Maybe a discarded dog like Axel could have become. There were too many K9s ending up in silence these days. By the time he reached his cruiser, dusk was settling in. The sun, what little showed through gray clouds, dipped behind the mountains, painting the snow in bruised lavender light. He climbed in, turned the heater on, and placed the collar on the dashboard. Next step, dig through records. Unit 23. Maven. See if they had ever been assigned to Red Hollow, see if they had gone missing. And follow the trail of a boy whose name had nearly faded with time. But before he pulled onto the road, Logan glanced at the collar one last time. His breath caught. Scratched beneath the metal tag, nearly invisible, were 3 letters etched by something small and sharp. AID. The night came down heavy over Red Hollow, a blanket of silence drawn too tight. Logan Carter lay in his bed, though resting wasn't the word. His muscles ached from tension, not fatigue. His mind refused stillness, too consumed with clawing at pieces of memory that wouldn't quite surface. The collar maven's collar sat on his nightstand like a relic from another life. The initials carved into the wood of the cabin still haunted him. A.L., and now that small word hidden beneath the brass plate aid. Coincidence? He didn't believe in them anymore. Sleep found him in fragments. And when it did, it came not as peace, but as distortion. He stood once again in the fog-drenched milliard on the night of Axel's death. Gunshots echoed, distant but smothered by time. And then Axel. His form rushing forward into the dark. His silhouette was framed in smoke and light, and then those eyes. Those piercing, human-like eyes turned to look at Logan, one last time. And in them, there wasn't fear. There was defiance, urgency, and then a voice. His captains barked over the comms. "Carter, fall back! That's an order!" Why? Logan had never questioned it then, not when everything went sideways so quickly, but in the dream, the tone was wrong. Not protective, but calculated, like they wanted him out of the way. He jolted awake, sweat beading at his brow despite the cold. The dream hadn't been just memory, it had shifted. As if his mind, free from distraction, had given itself permission to remember what it had tried to forget. He dressed quickly, tugged on his coat and gloves, and headed to the office well before dawn. The station was dark save for a single overhead light in the records room. Logan flicked it on and pulled Axel's behavioral logs from the K9 training files. Most were routine monthly checkups, field performance notes, and maintenance certifications. But then something stood out. A report marked confidential, dated 18 months earlier. Submitted not by Logan, but by Dana Hale. He opened it. It detailed an incident involving Axel and another officer, Officer Brad Kellner, mid-30s, tall, blonde buzz cut, broad like a former linebacker, with a reputation for short tempers and long grudges. During a warehouse training simulation, Axel had reportedly bit Kellner on the wrist after the man struck him during an obedience drill. The report indicated excessive force on Kellner's part, and though Dana had noted the injury was minor, the psychological report flagged the encounter as potentially triggering for the K9. Kellner was suspended for 3 weeks. Logan had never known why. He was on leave during that time. It had been buried in paperwork, shuffled quietly. But something else was attached. A voice memo. Logan plugged his headphones in and played it. A minute of silence. Then, a series of sharp barks, distorted slightly by the recording equipment. The pitch was irregular, not aggressive, but patterned, repeating. A pause. Then again. 4 short barks. 1 pause, 2 barks, another pause, 3. Dana's voice followed, soft and skeptical. The rhythm almost sounds intentional. It's not normal. I'm logging this in case it repeats. Logan played it again, and again. It wasn't random. Axel had been trying to say something, not just on instinct, as if he knew a code no one else could read. Later that morning, Logan found Dana at her clinic just outside town. The white building stood quiet under the rising sun, the American flag out front stiff in the breeze. Dana, wearing a thick sweater under her lab coat, met him at the front desk, her sleeves pushed to her elbows, revealing a faded tattoo of a shepherd's silhouette on her forearm. "I didn't expect visitors," she said with a tired smile, especially not ones with haunted eyes. Logan got straight to the point. "You submitted the report about Kellner. Why didn't you tell me?" Dana hesitated, then sighed. "I wanted to. But after that, there were consequences." "Such as?" "He started watching me. Nothing direct. But he made comments, showed up places uninvited. Then someone in admin suggested I reconsider filing sensitive behavioral complaints if I wanted to keep my county contract. I didn't want to make enemies." Logan nodded slowly. "He ever work with K9's again?" "Not officially, but I know he was on the list to be reassigned. There was a second dog being prepped for field duty, didn't make it." Logan furrowed his brow. "You mean Maven?" Her eyes sharpened. "How do you know that name?" "I found his collar." Dana went quiet, then walked to a nearby cabinet, unlocking it. She pulled out a manila file and laid it on the counter. "I didn't include this in the official records," she admitted, "because it wouldn't have mattered. This was from a wellness check I ran on a stray spotted near the southern ridge 2 nights ago. Large German shepherd, shaggy coat, limping. I couldn't catch him. But I saw enough to know he wasn't wild. Wore a torn collar, scar on his left ear." "Left ear?" Logan asked. "Like someone tried to cut out an ID chip," Dana said grimly. "And failed." A pause hung heavy between them. "Where did you last see him?" "Between Hayward's Trail and Timber Hollow, near the old quarry. He watched me for a few minutes, then ran." Logan nodded. "Maven's alive, maybe with the boy." Dana leaned closer. "Whatever's happening here, Logan, it didn't start with Axel, and it's not going to stop unless we push back." He didn't speak, but the weight in his chest shifted, little less confusion, a little more fire. That night, Logan sat alone at the station, headphones on, playing Axel's recorded barks over and over again, scribbling the pattern out on paper. A code. Maybe a cry for help. Maybe a clue. All he knew for sure was this. Somewhere between memory and betrayal, Axel had tried to leave a message. Now, Logan was finally starting to hear it. The cemetery sat on the western edge of Red Hollow, where the pine trees grew thick and the fog seemed to cling longer than it should. On the 5th night since Axel's burial, Logan Carter stood once more beneath the crooked branches and frost-covered stones, his breath steaming against the cold air. He was alone, dressed in black, hood up, gloves on, and heart pounding harder than it had on any stakeout in his career. He had waited until after midnight, after the security patrols had passed and the road lights had dimmed. He wasn't proud of what he was about to do, but pride was no longer a factor. The official reports had failed him. Someone had lied, and the answers were 6 feet below the earth in front of him. The grave was a shallow rectangle of packed dirt, still loosely held by the recent snowfall. Logan moved quickly, using a small shovel to lift the soil with quiet precision. Each clink of metal on rock echoed like guilt. The coffin, a standard-issue police K9 casket, came into view after half an hour of digging. He paused, heart caught in his throat, then unscrewed the top. Axel lay as he had remembered, still, serene, his coat dark against the white interior fabric. But when Logan examined the chest, he found no sign of a gunshot wound. No scar, no burn, no fractured bone. Instead, just above the front leg, a circular bruise with a pin-sized hole in its center. Logan leaned in closer. A needle mark. He closed his eyes, grief and fury roaring through him like twin storms. Axel had not been shot. He had been injected. Silenced. He gently sealed the coffin again and replaced the soil, erasing his presence with the care of someone burying more than a body. He was burying a lie. An hour later, Logan circled around the cemetery grounds toward the rear where the maintenance shed stood. Behind it, past the overgrown weeds and rusted fences, there lay the entrance to a collapsed stone well long sealed off in town records. But Logan remembered Axel scratching near it once, long before the dog had died. Back then, he thought it had been nothing. Now, he knew better. With effort, he pried the stone lid aside and aimed his flashlight down. A ladder, bolted to the side of the shaft, disappeared into darkness. He descended slowly, the air thick and cold like a tomb's breath. At the bottom, the tunnel yawned into view stone walls lined with rotted wooden supports. It had once been part of an old mining access shaft, long since forgotten. He moved forward. 10 feet, 20. The air smelled of mold and dust and disinfectant. He turned a corner and saw it. A corridor of cages, half rusted, doorless now, but unmistakably used to hold dogs. Torn leashes, empty bowls, claw marks on the concrete. And further in, crates with outdated K9 training manuals stacked nearby, labeled with unit numbers from cities he didn't recognize. One said, "Property of Apex Tactical Solutions." He froze. That name, he'd heard it before. A private security firm that had recently won contracts in several Colorado counties. But what did they want with discarded K9's? He picked up a ledger half buried under papers. Inside were records, names of dogs, units, behavior codes. Some were crossed out. Some had notes like redirected, non-compliant, or worse, terminated. It wasn't just training. It was culling. Suddenly, a sound behind him, a soft thud. He spun, gun raised, flashlight cutting through the tunnel. Silence. Then another sound. Paw steps. Emerging from the shadows was a large German shepherd. Fur thick, slightly matted. Its left ear bore a jagged scar, the same one Dana had described. The dog didn't bark. It didn't growl. It just stared, alert but calm. "Maven," Logan whispered. He slowly lowered his weapon. The dog's eyes flicked to the whistle clipped to Logan's vest. Without thinking, Logan gave a single sharp blow. The dog instantly straightened, tail low, ears forward. the same posture Axel had taken during high-alert drills. Then Maven moved forward, not charging, but slowly circling Logan, sniffing his boots, then sitting watchful. There was no aggression, no fear, only evaluation. Logan knelt and offered his hand. Maven leaned in, sniffed, then pressed his head briefly against Logan's palm. It was a test, and Logan had passed. Back above ground, Dana waited near her truck at the edge of Timber Hollow Road. Her flashlight swept the trees until Logan appeared, Maven trotting silently beside him like a ghost reborn. "He followed you?" she asked, eyes wide. "No. He found me," Logan said. Dana crouched to meet Maven's eyes. The dog didn't flinch, only sniffed her hand before turning back to Logan. "He reacted to the whistle, just like Axel," she said. "Same commands, same responses." "I think he was one of them, one of the redirected," Logan replied. "But he escaped." Dana looked back toward the woods. "What kind of place does that to animals like him?" "The kind that doesn't expect them to survive," Logan said. They loaded Maven into the back of Dana's truck, wrapped in a blanket. His breathing was steady now, more relaxed. As Dana drove off to check Maven at her clinic, Logan stood by the road, eyes scanning the tree line. What he had uncovered beneath the cemetery wasn't just a holding site, it was a system, a program, designed to erase, rewrite, and repurpose. But Maven had remembered, and now so did Logan. Carl Simmons sat alone at the edge booth of Mill Creek Diner, stirring cream into his coffee with lazy, deliberate swirls. It was early evening, and the place was mostly empty except for a waitress restocking sugar packets and an old couple quietly sharing a slice of peach pie. Carl's uniform jacket hung over the back of the booth, exposing a plain gray t-shirt stretched across his broad chest. He still had that boyish politician's smile, tight at the edges, rehearsed, meant for cameras, but his eyes had always given him away. Sharp, watchful, like he was constantly calculating whether a conversation was worth his time. Logan Carter stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming softly. His coat still smelled faintly of the dirt he'd shoveled from Axel's grave just nights before. He saw Carl look up, hesitate for a second, then nod like this meeting was just another chat between old colleagues. "Logan," Carl said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Didn't expect to see you here after hours." "I wasn't planning to talk here," Logan replied, sliding into the booth. "But I figured I'd give you the courtesy of doing this in public." Carl leaned back, arms spread across the booth. "Doing what, exactly?" "Cut the act," Logan said. "You and I both know what this is about." Carl's mouth twitched almost a smirk, but not quite. "You seem tense. Something bothering you?" "I just came from the old tunnel behind the cemetery. Found cages, tags, a ledger, dogs that went missing or washed out from service. One of them had your signature on their exit form. A K9 named Maven." Carl's composure cracked for just a second, just a blink, but Logan caught it. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Carl said. "Those files were handled by the department's admin." "Cut it," Logan snapped. "You were the last one to access Axel's dashcam footage. You deleted the record of that raid night, and you lied about what happened to him." Carl dropped the spoon into his mug with a clink. "You've been digging, haven't you?" Logan didn't answer. He leaned forward, voice low. "Did Axel bite you? Is that why you hated him?" Carl's jaw clenched. "He attacked me during a control drill." "He stopped you from hurting a rookie dog," Logan said. "I remember now. You were pissed about being passed over for K9 handler. You took it out on a pup, and Axel intervened." Carl leaned closer, voice hardening. "You don't understand what's really happening. Those dogs? They're assets. You think the city cares what happens to them once they're retired or flagged? Apex offered a solution. Better than euthanizing them. You sold their files, their training protocols, their behaviors. You knew what Apex was doing," Logan growled. "They wanted obedience, that's all." Carl shrugged. "Some of those dogs were too unpredictable. Others were retrainable. Axel was a problem." Logan's hands tightened into fists under the table. "He knew," Carl continued. "He started reacting weird every time I was near. Growled. Didn't listen. He was going to get flagged as compromised. I warned you, remember? You didn't listen." Logan stared at him in disbelief. "You had him killed." Carl leaned back, unbothered. "You think you're the first one who cared more about the dog than the job? Axel was a liability." "Then why fake the autopsy?" Logan pressed. "Why cover it up if it was protocol?" Carl's silence spoke louder than any answer. Then he smiled. Cold, final. Because not everyone agreed. Sheriff Danner tried to stop it. Raised a red flag on the Apex contract. 3 days later, he retired early. And now, no one questions procurement. Not even you. Until now. Logan's breath froze. Danner, the former sheriff, a man of integrity, had retired unexpectedly just weeks before Axel's death. Logan had never questioned it. But now he saw the pattern. "You sold us out," Logan whispered. Carl stood, pulling his jacket from the booth. "You have no proof, just guesses, and you're going to sound crazy without hard evidence. Good luck, Logan." As Carl walked out the door, Logan remained seated, jaw clenched so tightly it ached. The bell rang again as the door closed behind the traitor. From a far corner booth, someone stood, a quiet presence that had gone unnoticed until now. Sarah Quinlan. She approached slowly, trench coat dusted with snow. Her auburn hair was looser than usual, strands framing her stern, lined face. She looked at Logan with eyes that had seen too much but still burned with quiet fire. "I didn't want to interrupt," she said, her voice soft but unshaking. "I figured you'd get more if he thought he was safe." Logan exhaled. "How long were you listening?" "Long enough," she said. "We'll make it stick, but we'll need Dana, and that ledger." Logan nodded. "And Maven?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "The ghost dog? He's not a ghost, he remembers. Just like Axel did." Sarah paused, then said quietly, "So do I." The morning air still held the sharpness of winter, though the snow was finally giving way to patches of thawed earth. Dana Hale's clinic stood bathed in golden light, its porch creaking softly as the wind passed over its wooden frame. Logan Carter stood on the steps, holding a leash that felt too familiar, too heavy. At the other end of it, seated calmly, was the dog he now called Echo. Echo had spent the last few days under Dana's care, healing, eating, and slowly remembering. He wasn't the same as Axel. His coat was darker, rougher in texture, and his frame slightly taller. His left ear bore a jagged scar, a permanent mark of the life he had escaped. But it was the eyes, those amber eyes, sharp with awareness and pain, that stopped Logan cold. They didn't just watch. They judged, calculated, listened, like they had seen more than a dog ever should. Dana stepped out behind him, mug of tea in her hands. She wore a faded flannel shirt under a quilted vest, and her braid was pulled tight and practical. Her boots were muddy from the early morning rounds with her other rescues, and she carried herself with the quiet steadiness of someone used to fixing broken things without expecting thanks. "He's more responsive to you than anyone else," she said, watching Echo sit with calm alertness. "He hasn't growled once since you started using the hand signals." Logan gave a slow nod. "He knows them. Not perfectly, but enough. He's not guessing. He's remembering." "Muscle memory? Something deeper." Dana glanced at the dog. "Have you decided?" Logan looked down at the leash. "His name is Echo." She smiled gently. "Not a replacement, huh?" "No. A legacy." Later that day, Logan took Echo for a walk through Red Hollow Cemetery. The snow had melted into patches of pale mud and brittle grass. They passed Axel's grave, and Logan slowed. He didn't speak, just rested his hand on the stone for a moment. Echo stood still, ears up, gaze locked, not on the grave, but something behind it. He began to walk. Not run, just a slow, deliberate pace, like following a scent that didn't come from the ground. Logan followed as Echo moved toward the far western fence line of the cemetery, where a grove of pine trees clustered together like sentinels. One in particular stood taller than the others, its roots exposed by years of runoff and erosion. Echo approached the old tree, sniffing around its base. Then, suddenly, he began to dig. Sharp, measured strokes with his front paws. Not frantic, purposeful. Logan stepped forward, just as a bit of dark plastic peeked through the dirt. He knelt, brushing the soil aside, and pulled out a weather-worn USB drive wrapped in brittle plastic. He stared at it for a long moment. "You led me here," he whispered. Back at the station, Logan plugged the drive into a secure terminal in the evidence room. The folder held a single audio file. He hit play. The recording began with light static, followed by two voices, one of them unmistakably Carl Simmons. The other, unfamiliar, male, clipped and businesslike. "He's starting to show signs of resistance," Carl said, growling during briefings, not following Apex redirect protocols. "He's too attached to Carter," said the second man. "We warned you. Loyalty like that is dangerous." "What do you want me to do?" Carl asked, his voice cold. And a pause. Then, "Administer the solution. Quietly. Make it look like field failure. We don't want another Kellner situation." The clip ended. Logan leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. This wasn't speculation. It was a confession. He bagged the drive in an evidence pouch, labeled it, and placed it alongside the old Apex documents, the tunnel photos, and the collar marked Maven. The chain was tightening now. The pieces were no longer scattered, just waiting to be arranged into something irrefutable. That night, Logan sat down and wrote the report himself. No embellishment. Just facts, layered, chronological, supported by images and recordings. It included the death of Axel, the deleted footage, the hidden tunnel under the cemetery, the recovery of Maven, and now the audio proof that Apex had knowingly ordered a kill on a K9 partner deemed non-compliant. He encrypted the report and sent it directly to the Internal Affairs Division at the FBI's Animal Services Task Force. It was a long shot, but if even one person at the Bureau had a conscience, it might be enough. Outside, the first snow in days began to fall again, thin and silent. Logan stood in the station's training yard, Echo seated across from him under the floodlights. Logan raised a hand. "Down," he said. Echo obeyed immediately. "Eyes?" Echo locked onto him, steady and still. Logan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out Axel's old K9 badge bent at the edges but still gleaming faintly in the cold light. He clipped it gently to Echo's new collar, next to the name tag Dana had engraved just hours earlier. "You're not replacing him," Logan said quietly, "but you carry what he left behind." Echo didn't move, just watched. Same posture, same silence, same heart. The courthouse steps of Red Hollow stood silent in the golden hush of early morning. Above them, the flags waved gently in the cold breeze, and the whole town seemed to hold its breath. Logan Carter stood still, coat zipped up to his collar, the cold forgotten beneath the weight of this moment. Carl Simmons, once his colleague, once his friend, was being led away in cuffs. Shoulders slumped, jaw tight, eyes empty. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. The FBI agents who had swept in over the past 2 weeks had unraveled the whole rotten web. Apex Tactical Solutions was exposed, its contracts terminated, its operations dismantled. Federal files now bore Logan's evidence packet as Exhibit A. Forged reports, deleted footage, secret tunnels, coded conversations, and one old USB drive dug from the roots of a pine tree by a dog who never gave up. Sarah Quinlan stood beside Logan, her coat as dark as her expression, red hair loose in the wind. She had worked like a shadow interviewing, connecting the dots and ensuring none of this could be buried. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but certain. "We did it?" "No," Logan replied, watching the van doors slam shut behind Carl. "They did." He looked down at the dog by his side. Echo stood tall, alert, his badge freshly clipped to his collar. In his amber eyes burned the same unwavering fire that once lived in Axel's, the same instinct, the same promise. Later that morning, the town gathered beneath the open skies at the edge of Timber Hollow, where the new park had just been completed. What was once a tangle of forgotten training fields was now Axel's Watch, a memorial and a beginning. The dedication stone stood tall, etched with Axel's silhouette mid-run above the inscription, "For those who protected, even when no one else believed." Mayor Elaine Cross, sharp-eyed and dignified in her slate-gray coat, addressed the gathered townspeople with reverence. This park honors not only one brave K9, but all who serve with loyalty the world too often forgets. She turned to the front row. And today, we welcome a new protector to our ranks. Dana Hale, standing quietly in the crowd, flushed with surprise as the mayor called her forward. For her unwavering care of our four-legged officers and for her role in exposing injustice, Dr. Dana Hale is hereby appointed Veterinary Advisor to the Red Hollow Canine Unit. Applause followed, modest but sincere. Dana bowed her head slightly, her braid brushing her shoulder. "It's for them," she said softly, "not for me." Then Logan stepped to the podium, Echo at his side. He didn't need a speech. Instead, he clipped a new silver badge to Echo's collar unit 214, engraved just this morning. "You're not replacing Axel," he whispered. "You're carrying him forward." The crowd was beginning to disperse when Echo suddenly stiffened. His head turned toward the tree line beyond the memorial path. One ear tilted, nose high. Logan felt it immediately, the tension in the leash, the alert, the focus. "What is it, boy?" But Echo didn't wait for orders. He sprinted toward the western woods, weaving through pines and snow-patched underbrush. Logan ran after him, heart in his throat. Sarah and Dana followed without hesitation. Echo reached a half-collapsed hunting shed, overgrown with vines and moss. At its base, he began to dig, not like a dog chasing scent, but with furious, intentional force. Logan knelt beside him, tearing away frozen earth until a wooden hatch appeared beneath the debris. It was padlocked, but the wood was rotted. With one solid kick, Logan cracked it open and froze. Inside was a small concrete chamber, barely 6 feet across, damp and dark. Huddled in the corner was a boy, dirty, pale, arms wrapped around his knees. His lips were chapped, his eyes red, but he was breathing. Dana dropped to her knees. "Vitals are weak, but he's alive. Oh my God, he's alive." Sarah moved her flashlight closer. The boy blinked against the light. Then, in the faintest whisper, "Is he gone? The man with the gloves?" Logan's voice cracked. "What's your name, kid?" The boy looked up at him, hesitant. "Aiden," he said. "Aiden Lowry." Dana gasped. "Logan, that's the boy. The one from 6 months ago." A flood of realization hit Logan like a wave, the initials on the cabin wall, the collar, the tunnel, the ledger. Apex hadn't just taken dogs, they had taken witnesses. Aiden had seen something, and they'd kept him quiet. But Echo remembered. He'd been held nearby, trained in the same darkness, and now he had come back to finish what Axel started. Logan scooped Aiden into his coat. The boy didn't resist. He simply looked at Echo and whispered, "You came back. You were in my dream." That night, as the sun dipped below the trees, Logan stood once more beneath the Axel memorial. Echo sat beside him, his head resting gently against Logan's knee. Behind them, Sarah coordinated statements with the FBI. Dana sat with Aiden, wrapped in blankets and drinking cocoa brought by the mayor herself. The boy would heal. The town would remember. And Axel's legacy, now living in a dog named Echo, would never fade. Sometimes what we lose isn't truly gone. Sometimes God allows one door to close so another can open, through a bark in the dark, a paw print in the snow, or a whisper from a child who's been found. Axel may be gone, but through Echo, he kept protecting. And through Logan, justice was carried out. This wasn't just the story of a police officer and a dog. It was a story of faith, of listening to the quiet signs around us, of trusting that even in the coldest winter, God never stops working. And maybe, just maybe, miracles still walk among us. Sometimes on 2 feet, sometimes on 4. If this story touched your heart, let it be a reminder Never stop believing that healing is possible, justice is real, and love doesn't end at the grave. If you believe that animals have souls, that no child should ever be forgotten, and that God sends help in His own time, then type Amen in the comments. Let's pray together for every K9 still in service, every officer in search of truth, and every lost soul still waiting to be found. Comment below. Share this story with someone who still believes in miracles. Subscribe to the channel for more true stories of courage, love, and redemption. And may God bless you, wherever you are watching from. Amen.
"You don't even remember him, do you?" the woman hissed as she knelt in front of the little girl, her hands trembling not from rage but grief too long caged. 12-year-old Mara flinched, her fingers curling tighter around the photo frame. She'd carried from room to room since sunrise. It was chipped, cracked at the corner, but her father's eyes in the picture still looked exactly the same. Warm, strong, and unshakably kind. "I do remember him," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I just don't know how to say it." The courtroom was too quiet for a Thursday. Not the usual tension of legal proceedings, but a hush, like the walls were holding their breath. At the front, Sergeant Callan adjusted his uniform with the precision of a man who needed distractions. The decorated flag on the stand beside him was for Mara's father, Officer Dax Renly, fallen in the line of duty, shot during an illegal raid 2 years ago. But this ceremony wasn't about medals or folded flags anymore. It was about the strange dog that had been found weeks ago outside the woods near the outskirts of Grover Creek. A golden retriever, battered, wounded, one ear nicked, and the pads of his paws torn open, as if he'd run through hell to get here. No one knew where he came from. No tag, no microchip. Only the police officer's badge in his mouth, cracked and blood-stained. Mara had barely slept since hearing the news. The moment they mentioned the badge number, something inside her started clawing toward the surface. That badge had been buried, with her father. She knew because she placed it on his chest herself. The judge had opened an inquiry, not because it made legal sense, but because nobody could explain what was going on. And now the town's officials sat in folding chairs inside this solemn courthouse as the dog, silent and still, lay by the wooden steps like a statue carved from grief. "I want to speak," Mara said suddenly, standing up. Her aunt tried to pull her back down, shaking her head. "No, honey. Let the adults—" "No." She stepped forward, shoes scuffing the hardwood, hands shaking. Her voice rose, not from volume, but from something deeper. "He's the dog from my father's last shift. The one Dad said was too gentle for police work. He called him River." Gasps moved across the room like a quiet wave. The dog lifted his head slightly at the name, but didn't rise. His golden fur had dulled, matted from exposure. But it was in the eyes, those soft amber eyes, that something stirred. He was listening. "My dad brought River home the night before the raid," Mara continued, her eyes shimmering now. "He told me the dog failed the aggression test, but he didn't care. He said River was made for protecting, not attacking. I remember watching him feed River from his plate that night. He told me, 'This one doesn't know how to quit love, even if the world begs him to hate.' People weren't breathing. Even Sergeant Callan had lowered his clipboard. And then Dad left that morning, alone." She swallowed, tears catching her breath. "Except he wasn't. You see, I think River went with him. I think when the bullets started flying and everyone else fell, River didn't run. I think he stayed. And I think he's been trying to come back ever since." The judge stared at her, stunned, as the dog, slowly, painfully, pushed himself up and limped toward her. No one moved, not even Mara. When River reached her, he sat, then lay, then placed his head gently onto her feet, like he'd been waiting for this moment his entire life. Mara dropped to her knees, sobbing, not because it hurt, but because for the first time since her father's funeral, she felt something come back, not a ghost, not a voice, but the echo of love that didn't know how to quit. And in that echo, the whole room broke. Judges wept. Officers turned away. Because there, in the middle of it all, was the truth no one could file away or explain. River hadn't saved her father's life, but he'd saved the part of him that still needed to come home. And now, he had. The silence after Mara's words was heavier than any gavel ever dropped. Even the judge, a man known for his rigid formality, didn't speak. He simply watched, as the girl and the broken golden retriever leaned into each other. The kind of quiet reunion that didn't need permission to exist. Sergeant Callan stepped forward, unsure whether to intervene or kneel. He'd been a hardened officer for 23 years, had seen grief, had buried his own, but nothing prepared him for this. Mara stroked River's fur gently, whispering things too soft to hear. Her fingers traced the jagged line of the scar behind his ear, one that hadn't been there when he was last seen. "You tried to protect him," she murmured, voice cracking. "You stayed, and then you got lost." Behind her, whispers broke out among the crowd. Not the kind of gossip or courtroom chatter that usually brewed, but the kind that carries awe and disbelief. People remembered that raid. Everyone remembered how it ended, with Officer Dax Renly found alone, downed near an old barn, 2 suspects dead, 1 missing, and no sign of a backup unit. They called it a tactical failure, a dispatch mix-up, but no one mentioned a dog until now. The judge cleared his throat, but his voice faltered. "Miss Renly, Mara, you understand that without official records, this dog can't be—" "He is," she said without looking up. "You know it. You all do. That badge didn't get here by itself." Callan knelt slowly, setting his hands on his knees like he was approaching a live grenade. "Kid, I know your dad. I worked beside him for 12 years. He was the best man I've ever known. And if this dog was his, then he deserves more than a cold shelter and a number tag." River blinked up at him, chest still rising and falling, with exhaustion, but there was something else in his gaze now. Recognition. "You remember me, don't you, buddy?" Callan asked, voice hoarse. "I was the loud one who always dropped his coffee." The dog's tail moved, a single wag, and just like that, the room fell apart again. Later that evening, after the crowd had thinned and the judge called a recess for further evaluation, Mara sat in the station's old interview room. River, curled up beside her. Her aunt paced nearby, phone to her ear, arguing with someone about paperwork and liability. But Mara wasn't listening. Her eyes were locked on the framed photo on the wall, Grover Creek's Wall of Honor. There, frozen in time, was her father, smiling in his uniform. Beside him, just barely visible in the lower corner of the shot, was a golden puppy with comically big paws and floppy ears. That was the proof. Not official enough for a legal ruling, maybe, but real enough for Mara. Callan entered quietly with a small box in his hand. He placed it on the table in front of her, then sat across, sighing like the air had been punched out of him. "We found this in evidence storage," he said. "It was recovered from the barn after the raid, but no one ever matched it to a report." Mara opened the box slowly. Inside was a faded leather collar, torn but intact, with one engraved tag still dangling. River. She reached over, lifted it carefully, and fastened it around the dog's neck. River didn't resist. He simply leaned closer, pressing his head against her chest. "That collar," Callan said, "was found next to your dad's body, but no one put it together back then. Too much chaos." Mara looked up, her eyes red. "Do you think he saw him die?" Callan hesitated. "I think River didn't. Let him die alone. And for a man like your father, who gave his life for strangers, I think that mattered." The next morning, the town gathered again, not for a hearing this time, but for something far more human. A decision had been made overnight, quietly, without press releases or legal jargon. The judge stepped forward, removed his robe, and looked directly at Mara. "Sometimes," he said gently, "the law can't catch up to the truth fast enough, so we're going to let the truth stand on its own." Mara stood with River at her side as he continued. "This dog is no longer unclaimed. He is, from this day forward, recognized as a retired service companion to Officer Dax Renly and a member of the Renly family." The crowd applauded, not with fanfare, but with the kind of reverence saved for fallen heroes and those who return carrying pieces of them. River didn't bark. He didn't move. But the soft lift of his tail and the slow blink of his eyes said everything. Later that afternoon, as Mara led him back home, her father's old home, River paused at the front door, hesitating. She knelt beside him, lifting his face in her hands. "We're both learning how to come back," she whispered. "Let's do it together." And for the first time since her father died, Mara walked into the house not as a girl swallowed by grief, but as someone slowly learning how to heal, with the very soul that refused to let her father's memory be forgotten. Walking beside her, River had returned, not just to a house, but to the only person left who still heard her father's voice when everything else was quiet. And in that silence, they started over, together. Mara had always imagined closure would feel like something loud, like courtroom applause or thunder, or maybe even the shouts of joy she used to picture when her father came home from a long shift. But it didn't. It was quiet. It was River's slow, steady breathing as he slept curled beside her that night. It was the way her aunt pulled a blanket over both of them on the couch, silently brushing tears from her cheek before retreating into the hall. It was Callan lingering at the door, keys in hand, as though afraid leaving would shatter the fragile calm that had finally returned to that house. Mara didn't sleep. Not really. Her fingers traced the fur behind River's ears as she replayed her father's last words in her mind. He had always told her to trust her gut, that it would guide her when he wasn't there to. That morning in court, when she saw River on the auction list with no owner, no name, no past, something had screamed inside her, louder than grief, louder than reason. She hadn't just wanted to see the dog. She'd known it was him. She'd felt it. By sunrise, Mara was awake and already moving. She had something to prove now, not to the judge or even her aunt, but to River himself. He had survived, somehow. Through gunfire, through months on the run, through being forgotten, he had held on, for something or someone. She had to give that faith a reason. Her first stop was the old barn. Callan hadn't wanted her going alone, but she insisted. He followed at a distance, parked down the dirt road with binoculars like some overprotective guardian. But Mara knew she had to walk those steps herself. She needed to see what River had seen, needed to feel it. The barn had long since decayed, half its roof gone, vines strangling the wooden slats. The yellow tape was still wrapped around a few poles, weather-worn but clinging. She stepped inside, the air thick with dust and time. River hesitated outside, tail stiff, his body tense. Mara knelt just inside the door. "It's okay, boy. You don't have to go back in." But after a long pause, River stepped in anyway. He moved slowly, almost reverently, as if his paws remembered each creaking floorboard, and then he stopped, right in front of a scorched patch of dirt. A faint stain marked the center, barely visible under the light filtering through the holes in the roof. This was where her father had fallen. River sat and didn't move. Mara dropped to her knees beside him, throat closing. "You stayed here," she whispered, voice shaking. "You waited for someone to come." River's eyes, tired but unflinching, locked onto hers, and no one did. The guilt burned hotter than the morning sun. She had to do something. She couldn't change the past, but she could make sure River was never forgotten again. That night, she and Callan sat across a kitchen table littered with photos, old files, and a small notepad full of names. They were going to find the people responsible. Her father hadn't just been ambushed. He had been lured, trapped, and River had chased them. He'd tried to protect him. The scars weren't just from crossfire. They were deliberate. There had been another dog, someone said. A trained animal used as a distraction. It wasn't just a failed dispatch. It was a setup. Callan leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "You know this could get ugly, kid. These people, if they're still around." "I'm not scared," she said. River wasn't. Callan smiled faintly. "You really are your father's daughter." They started with the badge number. A few obscure reports from the raid had been flagged by someone named Officer Melton, who had since retired, vanished into the mountains. But one detail stood out in the report. A note about an unlicensed K9 spotted near the crime scene. Not River, not registered, another dog, a decoy. Mara knew if she could find that lead, she could clear River's name forever. And maybe, just maybe, understand why he had stayed behind, what he had been trying to protect even after her father had died. She left the table, walking out onto the porch with River close behind. The sky was bruised with stars, the air cool. She sat on the steps, and River placed his head gently in her lap. "You saved him," she whispered. "And I think you tried to save more. You were trying to come back to us." He blinked slowly, eyes finally closing. Safe now, but just before sleep claimed him, he gave a soft whimper, not of pain, of memory. A girl. There had been another girl. Mara's breath caught. He hadn't just stayed for her father. He had stayed for a child. Another child who had been there, and who was still missing. She bolted upright. "Callan," she called, running inside. "There's someone else." He didn't stay alone. He was trying to protect a girl. Callan stared at her, frowning. "Are you sure?" River stood behind her now, alert, tail stiff, eyes burning with something urgent. "I don't know who," Mara said, voice rising. "But he does, and we have to find her." Callan nodded slowly. The story wasn't over. It had just begun again, and this time, they weren't chasing ghosts. They were chasing truth, side by side. They didn't sleep that night. Not Mara, not River, not Callan. The moment Mara remembered the girl, just a glimpse buried in River's memory, in the echo of a whimper, something inside her shifted. She could no longer grieve quietly. She had to act, and Callan, watching, the fire in her eyes, knew better than to stop her. They dug deep into the police files her father left behind. There were 2 reports of children missing from the same area. The first, a runaway who had returned home weeks later. But the second, she had vanished the day after the ambush. A 6-year-old named Riley Kess. Her name was barely a footnote in the documents. No clear witness, no search team, just a closed file marked assumed deceased, like she'd never mattered. Mara clutched the page, jaw clenched. What if she didn't die? What if River stayed behind because she was still there? Callan didn't answer, but he was already dialing. Former officers, locals, old rescue volunteers. He didn't need convincing. River had protected a man in uniform until his last breath. There was no way he'd leave a child behind, not if he could help it. By sunrise, they were on the road. The barn was long gone, but River wasn't leading them there this time. No, he sniffed the air, circled the path, then turned sharply toward a broken tree line. His movements were deliberate, almost desperate. He was following something Mara couldn't see, but she felt it too, like a string pulling them all toward some buried truth. They found what was left of a hidden well, covered by tangled vines, surrounded by rotted fencing, and nearly swallowed by earth. It would have gone unnoticed by anyone else. But River went still. His tail dropped, his ears flattened, and then he whined, long and low. Mara rushed forward, peering into the darkness. The air inside was stale, still. The well had caved in at the edges, but at the bottom, glinting in the sunlight, was something unmistakable. A tiny red shoe. Mara stumbled back. Her breath caught in her throat. Callan said nothing. His hand rested on her shoulder, firm, steady, but she could feel his heart racing. They called it in. An excavation crew arrived 2 hours later. The local sheriff, the same man who had once dismissed the ambush as a botched operation, stood in stunned silence as a small body was gently lifted from the debris. Curled in a protective position, arms wrapped around a stuffed elephant, was Riley Kess, but she wasn't alone. Wrapped tightly around her chest was a strip of shredded police vest, her father's vest, and embedded in the dirt beside her was a single dog tag, Rivers. The silence that followed was heavier than any words. Reporters tried to make it a scandal. The public demanded justice. But Mara didn't care about any of that. Not right now. All she wanted was to go home, to sit with River, to hold the truth in her hands and weep, not from sadness, but from understanding. River hadn't been running. He had been watching, waiting, guarding the girl who couldn't be saved. And when he failed, when her body gave, out from the cold and the fear, he buried her as best he could, marked the site, and returned only when he knew he couldn't stay any longer. Mara stood before a small makeshift memorial days later. A new grave, a new name carved gently into stone. Riley Kess, 6 years loved. River sat beside her, quiet, solemn, his body aged and worn, but proud. You did everything you could, she whispered, fingers brushing the tag now tied around her own wrist. You were the only one who stayed. She felt Callan's hand on her back. He's not just a hero, he's a witness. Mara turned, voice low but clear. Then we tell his story, all of it, every scar, every truth, and that's what they did. Together they opened a small rescue center, but not for just any dogs, for service animals abandoned, betrayed, or left behind by the very systems they once served. They named it Kess Shelter, for Riley, for the forgotten. River lived out his final years not as a soldier, not as a weapon, but as a guardian, of Mara, of memory, of everything her father believed in. The day he passed, Mara held him close and whispered the words her father once said to her. You're safe now, boy. You did good. You can rest. And she swore, as tears soaked his golden fur, that no hero would ever be forgotten again, not while she still had a voice. Because sometimes the bravest souls don't wear uniforms. Sometimes they walk on 4 legs, and they wait, no matter how long, for someone to finally listen. The ceremony hall was hushed, the kind of silence that isn't empty, but full of held breath, quiet tears, and the weight of something that mattered. Rows of people sat with stiff backs and solemn faces, Officers in full uniform, veterans with canes beside their chairs, families clutching framed photographs of those who never came home. At the front stood Mara, a girl barely 17, but with shoulders that carried generations of silence. And at her side, with fur gone almost silver from the years, sat River, scarred, regal, and still watching everything with those mournful amber eyes. She hadn't planned to speak. Not until she saw the way River's ears had perked up at the sound of the honor guard's drums. Not until she watched a small boy in the front row reach for his father's empty medal. That's when Mara rose from her seat, walked to the podium, and let her truth spill out. "My father wasn't supposed to die," she began, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. "But I think, deep down, he knew he would." Somewhere in the audience a woman sobbed quietly. "He wrote letters I wasn't meant to read until I was older. Letters about courage and sacrifice, sure, but also fear, loneliness, and about a dog he called his shadow, a golden retriever who followed him through fire, through storms, and finally, into silence." Mara turned her eyes toward River, who blinked slowly, almost as if he understood every word. "You see, when everyone else left, this dog stayed. When the bullets stopped, and the smoke cleared, when no one came looking, River did something I didn't understand back then. He buried the child he couldn't save. He waited by a road for weeks, and when he finally came home, no one noticed that he never stopped looking over his shoulder. There was no sound but breathing. People said he was broken, damaged, even dangerous. But I saw something different. I saw a memory, a guardian. I saw my father's legacy carried in a dog's heart." Mara paused and reached into her coat pocket. Slowly, she lifted a small object into view, a folded police badge, scorched at the edges. "This was found near a child's remains, buried in the woods," she continued. "The child wasn't related to my dad. She wasn't part of his mission, but he gave her his vest and his dog. He didn't run. Neither did River. They stayed. That matters." The room broke then. You could hear it. Men who had buried friends let their faces fall into their hands. Mothers gripped their children tighter. Even the chief of police stood, back ramrod straight, but eyes shining. "I know he didn't wear a uniform," Mara said, her voice cracking now, "but he deserves to be remembered as one of them." She turned toward River, knelt beside him, and tied the badge gently to his collar. The dog didn't move. He only leaned forward and rested his head against her chest, a low, content sigh leaving his tired lungs. The crowd stood in one unified motion. Applause didn't come instantly. It came in waves, first from one corner, then another, until the entire room roared, not for the fallen officer, not for the department, but for the dog who had been forgotten by the system he once served. Later that evening, as the crowd filtered out and the lights dimmed, Callan approached Mara on the empty stage. "You know," he said softly, "I've seen medals given to people who never did half of what that dog did." Mara nodded, brushing a hand over River's fur. "Then it's time we start giving medals to the ones who truly earned them." They didn't go home right away. Instead, they stopped by the graveyard where her father was buried. A new plaque had been placed beneath his name. It read, "In honor of River, faithful to the end." Mara knelt down, pressing her forehead to the cool marble. "He waited for me, Dad. You don't have to worry anymore." River laid beside her, eyes closed, tail thumping weakly in the dirt. The stars above seemed brighter than usual. Or maybe they always had been. Maybe she just hadn't looked up in a while. The next morning, they woke to news spreading across the nation. Headlines weren't about war or tragedy for once. They were about a golden retriever who stayed behind when no one else did. About a girl who told the story nobody had dared to remember. Donations flooded in for the shelter. Letters from soldiers. Messages from families who'd lost everything, but found comfort in a stranger's courage. River passed away in his sleep 1 week later. He didn't whimper. He didn't cry. He simply curled beside Mara's bed, nose resting on the badge she'd pinned to his collar, and exhaled one final time. Mara didn't scream. She didn't beg for more time. She only whispered the words she had rehearsed in her heart every night for months. "You made it home." They buried him beside her father, wrapped in the same vest he had once torn to protect a child. And as the last shovel of earth settled over the grave, Mara placed a medal on top. A real one this time. A hero's medal. Because some heroes don't ask for honor. They just wait long enough for someone brave enough to tell the truth. And this time, someone did.